there, and welcome to Concerned Women for America's special presentation on the U.S. Constitution, coming to you live on Facebook from the nation's capital to your living room, wherever you're watching from, on your cell phone or tablet or computer or even on your TV. Let us know what state you're watching from. We'd love to see that. Anyone from sunny California or Texas, Tennessee, Virginia, and Maryland in the house? Great. Well, wherever you're watching from, it is great to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time and investing this time with us. It is very much appreciated, and I hope it is very beneficial to you. Today we will focus on Article 2 of the Constitution, dealing with the executive branch. That's right. Part 1 and 2 are available right now on our Facebook page. You can access previous Facebook Live broadcasts, or you can check out our website, concernedwomen.org, where we have every episode available to you. I am happy to announce that other series like this one are already on production for you. Our very own Dr. Shay Garrison has commenced work on a new upcoming series on socialism that will be a must-watch for you teens and college students out there. In fact, Concerned Women for America is starting a new CWA Academy for Conservative Principles, or CACP, that will be producing educational content for you and your children on the most important issues of our time. So stay tuned, like our Facebook page, and sign up for our CWA alerts at concernedwomen.org to keep up with the latest content available. Now back to our discussion of the U.S. Constitution. Today we'll focus on Article 2, as I mentioned, which sets up the executive branch, and we'll get right into the text of Section 1, which tells us that the executive power shall be vested in... You know what, let's make that your first constitutional trivia question. The executive power granted by the Constitution shall be vested in blank. Is it A, Congress, B, the legislature, C, the President of the United States, or D, the Supreme Court? The answer is C, the President. This is an extremely important clause we're starting with here, because the President will be controlling a big part of government. A lot of people will work under him. But we must always remember, as we hear about these departments and agencies taking executive action, that they were not granted that power by the Constitution. The President and the President alone was granted the executive power under the Constitution. They are acting on his authority. Remember that. This power of the President will be challenged over and over. So-called independent agencies will rise up all the time to oppose the President's policies. They do this often. The question is under what authority they do so. It is a big problem that comes to the Supreme Court ever so often. There's a case pending right now before the court that highlights this issue and how important it is to interpret the Constitution correctly. But if you and I were at the Supreme Court, you would remember Section 1 of Article 2 and answer on this point that any agency of the executive branch obtains its power under the authority vested in a President of the United States. And you would be right. Okay, time for your second trivia question. We're talking about the executive branch, the President. So here's an easy one for you. Who was the first President of the United States? We've talked about him before. Who was the first President of the United States? Was it A, John Adams, B, George Washington, C, George Harrison, or D, Thomas Jefferson? What do you think? Let me get the little ones to answer this one. What do you think? It was B. George Washington. You got it right. George Harrison sounds presidential, but he was in fact one of the Beatles. And if you don't know who the Beatles are, well, ask mom and dad. Let's keep reading Article 2. After granting all executive power to the president, it gives us some more details about the office of the president. Remember, the founders are starting out a new form of government. So what type of office are they setting up here? Was it just a king by another name? The resounding answer of the Constitution is no. It tells us that the president will hold his office for 4 years. The 22nd Amendment then let us know that he can only be elected twice, so 2 terms of 4 years, and that he and the vice president will be elected in a very peculiar way. We won't have time to go into all the ins and outs of this system, but I will get you fully prepared to understand how it works today, as modified already, as I mentioned, by the 12th Amendment and the 22nd and the 23rd Amendments. But to understand the purpose of this system and why it is good for liberty and freedom, let's think about what the Founding Fathers' challenge was. At the time of the founding, they sought to unite a whole group of free, independent states into one nation. These states had just rebelled against an authoritarian king dictating unjust, uniform policies across the ocean. They had no intention to surrender their freedoms now to some centralized, authoritarian new government that may be a bit closer but still not part of their community. You see, a purely democratic system where the majority rules always preys on the more vulnerable. Why would a small state like Delaware join a purely democratic union with, say, California, whose population will just swallow them up and make them subservient to their preferred desires? They are their own state. The people of Delaware would never agree to that because they would just be exchanging one person dictating their lives from afar for another person, this other group dictating their lives from afar. That is why the founders rejected a purely democratic popular vote to elect the president and the vice president when they wrote the Constitution, and why it is still very important to the protection of our union today. Many today would like it to go away.
Ocasio-Cortez tweeting, quote, "It is well past time we eliminate the Electoral College, a shadow of slavery's power on America today that undermines our nation as a democratic republic."
We can have national voting, and that means get rid of the Electoral College.
But this would open our country up for what is known as the tyranny of the majority. We must reject that. Instead, the founders devised a system that would protect each state, regardless of size, and would still give voice to the majority of the people. Do you know what that system is called? We'll make that your third trivia question. How are the president and the vice president elected? Is it A, by popular vote, B, through electors, C, by chance, or D, by date of birth? What do you think? The answer is B. According to Article 2, Section 1, each state shall appoint a number of electors to select the president and the vice president. It further tells us that they will be in number equal to the number of senators and representatives the state has. You will hear this system referred to as the electoral colleges. We did not discuss the number of senators and representatives on our discussion of Article 1, so let's ask that here as your next trivia question. How many senators does each state have? Is it A, 2, B, 5, C, 25, or D, according to the state's population. How many senators does a state have? A, 2. In the Senate, each state has 2 senators, regardless of population. And again, it was the founders' effort to have a fair representation for all states in the federal government. Now, how about the representatives in the House? How many per state? As your trivia question number 5, how many U.S. representatives does each state get? Is the answer A, 2, B, 3, C, depends on the population, or D, according to the land size of the state, how big it is? What do you think? The answer here is C. It depends on the population. There are 435 seats or members in the House. Each individual state is awarded members based on its population, on the total number of people residing in the state. Every 10 years, the United States government conducts a census. You might have had to fill that questionnaire recently, or you saw mom and dad filling it. That census will be used to determine how many representatives to the House of Representatives each state will have. So it is possible then, with population growth and decline, that a state gain or loses representatives depending on the population. So here's a trivia question number 6 for you. Which state has the most U.S. representatives today? Is it A, California, B, Texas, C, Alaska, or D, New York? Which state? Remember, according to population. The answer is A, California, which currently has 53 representatives. Several states have just 1 representative. Here's a trivia question on that. Which one of these states has only 1 U.S. representative? Is it A, West Virginia, B, Rhode Island, C, Maine, or D, Alaska? Which state has only 1 representative? Which one of these? The answer is D, Alaska, which is a great example because Alaska is one of the largest states in terms of land size, but not in terms of population. And that is why it only has 1 representative. But bonus question, let's see if you remember, how many senators does Alaska have? That's right, I try to trick you, but you're too smart. 2, just like any other state. Okay, back to our discussion of Article 2 on how the president and the vice president are elected. Each state will have electors according to the number of senators and representatives that it has. Let's put our math hats on again then and see if we can figure it out. If there are 435 members in the House and each state has 2 senators, there are 50 states, how many electors should there be then? That's right, there should be 535. But there are 3 more. There are 538. How can that be? Another bonus question for you. It is because of Washington, D.C. The District of Columbia is not technically a state, but it is awarded 3 electoral votes for this purpose, giving us that magic 538 electors. When you're voting for the President of the United States, you are really voting for how these electors in your state should vote. It is those 538 electoral votes which ultimately count towards the result. The number that you will hear then when the presidential election comes along is 270. That is the number of electors that the president needs out of the 538 to win. This system of electoral colleges, as it is known, encourages presidential candidates to pay attention and care for the entire country, not just the well-populated areas. It is another layer in that structure we talked about last time. which protect our freedoms. Okay, let's move on from that area now and go to Article 2, Section 1, which tells us that the president must be a natural-born citizen, and he or she must be 35 years or older, and he or she must have been a resident of the U.S. for 14 years. Section 1 also tells us what would happen in case something happens to the president, like his death. The final part of this section gives us the oath that the president will take as he takes the office. He promises that he will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. This is a very interesting oath, isn't it? He abides himself to the Constitution. That structure we talked about is what he is committed to uphold, so that he must embrace those things that even make his job harder, more difficult. And why? Because in the long run they protect our freedoms. Section 2, Article 2 makes the President the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States, which we had already mentioned in our previous episode, brings him in as a check on Congress's sole power to declare war, and vice versa. You remember that. It also tells us he has the power to grant reprieves and pardons, except in cases of impeachment. In that case, this power granted to the president makes him a check on the courts, which might convict or sentence someone unjustly, so the president can pardon. The president has the power to make treaties with other countries, provided that 2/3 of the senators concur. He will also nominate officers with advice and consent of the Senate, also ambassadors, public ministers, consuls, and judges. This is a very important power of the president. Article 2, Section 3 sets up what we have come to know as the State of the Union Address. Have you heard of it? Well, here it is in the constitutional text. This clause tells us that the President shall from time to time give to Congress information of the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. Notice it doesn't say how he will do that, but the State of the Union speech has become the norm. It continues, he may on extraordinary occasions convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. So the president has some power to work with, again, to serve as a check on Congress and the courts. Notice this clause also charges him with the faithful execution of laws. This will be a big part of the president's charge, law enforcement. This does not give him the authority to infringe on the power of each state to enforce its own laws. But as to the federal law, the president is charged with that function. More on that relationship between federal government and states here in a little bit. Section 4 sets out the causes for which the president, vice president, and all civil officers shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. As you might remember, the meaning of that phrase was the subject of much discussion in the media and in Congress because of the unjust attempt to remove President Donald Trump from office. It was this phrase clearly that set a high bar for removal that protected him from the desperate action of his political opponents in this case. The founders, once again, were proven right in setting up these checks and balances, this structure that serves as a barrier to our worst impulses. It is here that I want to pause and talk about this concept of federalism. We started today talking about how the original states who formed the United States of America had a natural inclination against a federal government that may become as tyrannical as what they had experienced before under King George III. They valued their autonomy and wanted to retain power. That is why the founders created a federal government through the Constitution with specific enumerated and delegated powers. All other powers beyond that were to remain with the states and the American people, as we've discussed. Even as they enumerated certain individual rights in the Bill of Rights, they enacted the Ninth Amendment, which says that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And the 10th Amendment, that says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. This respect for the states and the people was crucial to a successful union. The union would not have happened without it. Unfortunately, we have lost that vision of our form of government as the federal government continues to grow each and every day, and the federal government continues to take on areas of government it was never intended to enter. It is why it feels like we are losing some of our freedoms today. What can we do about it? Well, here's a review trivia question for you. From where does the federal government ultimately derive its power? This power, we are now saying, has grown perhaps too powerful. Is it from A, votes, B, experience, C, laws, or D, we the people? It is, of course, from the consent of the governed. From D, we the people. The answer to the ever-growing size of government is you and me. We the people must demand better from our elected officials, all of them, because as we have seen, they all serve as checks on each other. We must demand more from our state officials, which should assert their own powers as a check on the federal government. We, the people, have the power under the Constitution. But sometimes, if we don't know our role as citizens, we can actually give our power away without even knowing we had it. That is why you are so important to this country. And I'm glad you're taking the time to learn about the U.S. Constitution with us. So if the federal government starts to take on an area in the future where they have not been granted power under our Constitution, like let's say the elections, you are hearing about this today with the spread of coronavirus and the upcoming election. They're thinking of ways to alter the election, and the federal government might take some power on that. You and I, as constitutional experts now, would say no. Federal government, you cannot take on this power. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Well, good work, everyone. You made it. We've come a long way, and you are getting good at this. We will have 2 more sessions to come, one on Article 3 and one on Articles 4 through 7 and some of the constitutional amendments. So let's take a look forward to our next session with our final trivia question for today. We've already established that the Constitution sets a framework of 3 branches of government. We've covered the legislative branch on Article 1. We've covered the executive branch, the office of the president, today on Article 2. So what branch will we study next time under Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution? Is it A, presidential, B, popular, C, judicial, or D, the olive branch? You got it. It is the judicial branch. You won't want to miss that discussion. It should be very entertaining for you. And it will be live here on Facebook at 3 p.m. 2 weeks from today on May 20th. Let your family and friends know about it, and I will see you then. God bless.